really never felt more sure what my role is, what our place is here, Jesse and Colin. Then when I was on my way upstairs, our studio's up a floor above where we work, I have to go by a little vending machine area. And management likes to rotate the snack foods and whatnot through there. Mind you, nothing he'd ever find on his plate. You know they got Vienna sausages down there? It's like there's an active campaign against the employees, certain ones in this building. And, you know, it's a war I'm willing to fight, but it's a war nonetheless. We're jam-packed. I didn't drive over 1,000 miles yesterday to come back home to not do a jam-packed show. We're high atop a very distracted downtown Nashville, Tennessee. On one hand, yes, we've got a jam-packed show tonight, but then again, the conference basketball tournament, the SEC basketball tournament just wrapped up across the street. And so I'm told, hold on, so I'm told the brackets have been announced. So good on the NCAA. They kept their word. They got it out of the way before our show starts. That was our agreement. You know, the NFL has not moved the Super Bowl off Sunday night, but the NCAA did make sure to get their business wrapped up before the show so we can talk about things like spring intel, whispers, little hoof beats that we've gotten as we've put our ear to the ground. Rich Rodriguez is out there speaking for virtually everyone who consumes college athletics and college football these days. I'll discuss that. I'm going to attempt to fix the transfer portal tonight. Not one of those 5 or 10 point plans, just one thing. I'm just going to give you one. I'm also going to give you something similar on scheduling. Not 5 or 10 points. Those are boring. Everyone goes to sleep by point 3. Just one thing that I'd love to do different. Of course, yesterday was a big storm chasing day. So later on in the show, not at the beginning, but later on, I'll talk about that. It's all brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, and we appreciate them. Where are they watching us? Well, they're watching us in Winchester, Virginia, Soso, Mississippi, ironically a town I was in yesterday for a brief period of time, along with sister city Laurel, Mississippi. Chicago, Illinois is tuned in. Lawton, Oklahoma. Thank you guys so much. We will have a show Tuesday night this week, not Thursday, because on Thursday I will be on the road. Can't tell you where yet, but the Pate State Speaker Series sleeps for no tournament, the NCAA tournament included. So I will be at a couple of campuses, or as we know the plural of campus on this show to be, campi. I will be on several campi this week, meeting, speaking with, communicating with different staffers and coaches and players, all to bring us a more well-rounded show. Case in point, as we pop the paper, you know what I hold in my hand? Spring intel. Some schools out there, some programs out there have started spring, and so we're starting to get a little feedback, and we're starting to gather some intel. For example, talking to some folks around Oklahoma. And I am very interested, as is pretty much everyone else watching the show that traffics in such things, about what this whole quarterback offensive coordinator infusion is going to consist of. What's it going to look like? So for those of you out there who are just sort of diving in, or maybe you're not diving in, maybe you're dipping your toe back in to check on updates throughout spring on different programs. John Mateer is a transfer quarterback here. So he comes in, he's a multi-year starter, so he's not some rookie, he's not a former 5-star freshman that didn't play and now he's got to break in with Oklahoma. He's got experience at Washington State. One of the little pieces of almond from the bar I just ate flew out of my mouth there. I hope we caught that. So we got him. And we've also got his offensive coordinator, old Coach Arbuckle, coming along with him. So naturally, you wonder, well, Oklahoma was kind of low-key terrible last year. What changes will we see? Well, it will not surprise you, probably a whole heck of a lot, to find out the early returns are good here. Now, I never take that for granted. Oklahoma's got to hit on this. It's not optional. It's not an either-or. Oklahoma flat-out has to have hit on this quarterback acquisition. Now, they feel like they did. There's a lot of brimming confidence there. You don't have to learn a new system because the quarterback comes along with his offensive coordinator. That's what has sold them on the idea that, hey, we can turn this thing around pretty quickly. Also, you're going to pair that with probably what is a ready-made top 20, top 15 caliber defense. But also, remember this time last year, just to give you an idea of how solid the folks at Oklahoma are, the feedback we were getting from there was not great. And I don't know if you remember this, but I went on the show took a fair amount of criticism for this because a lot of folks wanted to sell you on the idea that Jackson Arnold, this was just going to be his coming out party this year. And he flat out had a not so great spring last year. He was turnover prone. That offense was turnover prone. Now, magically, Preview Magazine culture suggests, oh, don't worry, it's just because it's spring. What? Huh, well, he was turnover prone in the bowl game. Yeah, but that's just one game. Okay, but he was turnover prone throughout spring. Yeah, but it'll all get cleaned up, whatever the world that means, cleaned up. It'll all get cleaned up by the time the season starts. And all I did, and poor me, I wish more people would have felt sorry for me after this. All I did was I sat here and said, might we have a little bit of a situation here? Might we have a little bit of a red flag? Nope. Just toss that take out on the street. Well, it knocked on the door several times. It got tossed out on the street in the spring, but then come fall, they were a very turnover-prone team. And I'm telling you that not to pat myself on the back, actually, partly to pat myself on the back, but mostly to remind you our sources at Oklahoma are good. So they'll tell you when it's not good, and in this case, they'll tell you when it is good. But the other thing that they have got to work on, the other thing I know they've emphasized, is just team speed. Just get faster. Don't even care what position group it is. Get faster. And it would not shock me if they, like many others out there, looked and said, you know, we could use one more experienced offensive lineman in the portal. Good luck, because that is a very, very, very rabid market. There is not enough supply out there to provide for all the demand that there is. Florida. You've been keeping track of this? I know Florida fans have. I know rivals of Florida fans have. But DJ Lagway is, you know, one of the poster children, I guess, for this upcoming season. He was a guy that led a big second-half turnaround for Florida last year. He figures to be one of the key names in the landscape of the quarterback picture this fall. But here's the problem. If he doesn't play, then that can't come to fruition. What are you talking about? Are you fear-mongering? No, but I am telling you he hasn't thrown, at least publicly, at least while any eyeballs that are willing to share such details have been on him this spring. Billy Napier, for his part, the current head coach at Florida, by the way, if you stopped watching after week 4 last year, you would have thought he'd long been gone. No, he did not get fired. He's still there. He led a second-half resurgence, and now quarterback DJ Lagway comes back, but he hasn't really been throwing, and everyone's up in arms. What's he doing just handing off in practice? Are they being just cautious? Are we screwed? Is it somewhere in between? Well, Director Colin has arranged for us to have some sound from Billy Napier. He's not on the show tonight, but some sound nonetheless. Here is the head coach at Florida on the current status of DJ Lagway.
I think our intentions here are to be very smart. I do think he'll be limited in throwing activities, but he'll participate in all practices otherwise. And we've done a lot of homework here relative to the things that he went through as a player. I mean, he was an absolute warrior and a great competitor that showed toughness. And we've consulted with quite a few experts here from a UFL, from a national perspective, as we do with a lot of our players, you know, in terms of second opinion. So I think in general, he'll be able to do quite a bit, but there will be some limitations.
Now listen. Once upon a time, they told Stone Cold to stop wrestling. He went and got a second opinion and had several more very, very impactful years tacked on to the end of his career, although it was still cut short. Second opinions are not normally something you're seeking unless you get bad news on the first opinion. This is baseless speculation on my part because I have no further information on this. Now, of course, when we take the Speaker Series tour to Gainesville this year, which we will inevitably do, we'll sit right down with Billy Napier. He'll come on the show, and I'm sure he'll share all the intimate details that aren't protected by HIPAA, of course, or HIPPO, you know, the masculine version of HIPAA, because DJ Lagway is male. Again, don't question me on this. I don't need to teach everyone grammar. That just is the way it is. But short of Billy Napier just spilling his guts on the show, that may be all we get. And so we're left to wonder, is DJ Lagway okay? We don't know. Once upon a time, Meemaw taught me one of the most valuable things you can ever say, Joshua, when they put a microphone in front of you and the camera is live, is just know when to say you don't know. So I am here to tell you, even in a segment that we fashion as being about intel and whispers and scoop, on this particular front, I don't know. But I do want you to know, if you're listening on podcast, that we're looking at their schedule right now, Florida's, this fall. And notice that, yes, they start week 1 just like everyone else, but they play 1, 2 games out of conference. Then they have LSU. Then they have another game. Then they have a bye. Texas is their second conference game. It's not until week 6. So, I don't know, maybe DJ Lagway is good to go. Maybe we're just getting punked. However, there is at least the outside shot that he's not ready to go. And if he's not, maybe he'll be ready to go by week 6. Because what are we trying to do there? We're trying to win the conference. We're trying to be in the conference championship race. And so if he's not ready to go by Long Island, no, it's not a trip they're taking. That is Florida's literal week 1 opponent. If he's not ready by Long Island, history indicates Florida may still be okay against Long Island. I'm not sure if that'd be okay against LSU and Miami, but I want to get him ready as quickly as possible, and it's not the end of the world if he's not ready to go just right out of the gate. It could be much ado or much to do about nothing. Never got the proper phrasing on that. I think it's still heavily debated. What about Alabama? Let's get this out of the way. Let's talk about the quarterback situation. There's a lot of debate right now. I'm not sure why. There's a lot of debate around Alabama circles and beyond about who the starting quarterback will be there. Hey, not a big deal. It's not the first time a major program has had as the main talking point who's going to start at quarterback. I said a couple of weeks ago, I thought it was Ty Simpson's job to lose, which I still think I'm right about. Some out there recklessly took that to mean that I was calling for Ty Simpson to win the job. I wasn't calling for Ty Simpson to do anything other than be the favorite at the moment I made the statement. I still think he's the favorite to win the job. So this is not something FanDuel has odds on, although I'm speaking in those terms. Here's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is nobody's right now. There is a layer of thinking out there shared by many that Keelan Russell, 5-star true freshman, Elite 11 MVP, I think, he's going to come in and he's going to end up taking that job. If he does, it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world. It'd be a mild surprise. It wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world because he's going to end up being a stud one day. But here's my thinking on that. As is the case with virtually every true freshman at quarterback, I'm going to make them prove me wrong by winning the job. It's no disrespect to them. It's respect to how hard it is to start at quarterback in major college football for anybody, much less someone who is playing college football for the first time. I don't care if you're an early enrollee. Yeah, that gives you a better shot, but everyone early enrolls now. I don't care if you trained under some of the best, because pretty much everyone who's going to have that 5th star attached to their name has been conditioned to be a big-time quarterback for years out of high school, and they all trained with the very best. So, yes, statistically, you have a better shot. I'm still going to make you prove me wrong by winning the job. So if Keelan Russell does that, then that's wonderful. But the follow-up is, if we had Kalen DeBoer on the show, which I'm sure we will on that front at some point this spring as well, and we were to lie detector him, we just polygraphed him, I'd wonder a couple of things. Why did his legal representation allow this? But we're going to roll with it. Secondly, let's just ask him, do you even have a really, really, really good idea who's going to win the job this fall? He'd probably have a good idea. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. That's why they're still repping and they're still practicing. But I will say this, I said this many times about quarterback battles. Like I've seen a lot of people trying to say, well, this could be this year's version of Graham Mertz, DJ Lagway. Your general point's taken. Now, Lagway starting last year because Mertz got hurt. I think what you're indicating when you say that is maybe Ty Simpson is the starter to begin the year, but then eventually Keelan Russell's just too good to keep on the bench. He's too good to keep in that number 2 role. You could be right. Wouldn't shock me. You could be right. Because what I've said for a long time about quarterback battles is everyone looks at it as it's either the backup's ready by week 1 or else we look to the next year. Well, there's this world where Keelan Russell is not ready to start by Florida State, but he is ready to start by, let's say LSU. Granted, that'd be a tough first start for a true freshman, but I was just looking where Bama's second bye is. It's another 2-bye year. Every team's got 2 byes. And so that bakes in 2 possibilities where you got 2 weeks to get your new starter ready. I don't know. Who's going to start at quarterback? I think it's going to be Ty Simpson, but what I'm trying to say is they don't know either. They may have varying degrees of ideas, but they don't know either. But what I will tell you is a couple of bits of feedback from Alabama beyond that. Number one, I think there was about as much of a program reset as you can get after last season. I think last season will end up being such a valuable teaching point for Alabama. From Kalen DeBoer's perspective, from a nutrition perspective, from a strength and conditioning perspective, from a sports psychology perspective, everything that is encompassed in what a college football program is now gets to look at 2024 and say, do you ever want that result again? If your answer is no, here's how it's going to have to be. And if you're comfortable with that result again, you don't belong here anyway. I think in many cases, that winter conditioning program and what has happened since last year to this year was built to push everyone towards the edge. And whoever falls off, and you're not supposed to be here, and that's okay. In the short term, it may suck, but in the long term, we'll backfill with someone who is built to be here. But in the long term, you hope you have a product put on the field for spring that gets a lot of good work done. You learn a lot about him, but you just hope that team has that edge to it come fall that it lacked at times last year. I think they killed it with their true freshman class. And I think Lotzier Brooks, just if you want to start circling names, old number 17 down there, I think that's a name to watch. Bama 24/7, by the way. Scarborough and the guys over there doing a really good job covering that team. LSU, I'm looking at offensive tackle. I think many of the fans down there are looking at offensive tackle. But you know what else I'm looking at is their downfield passing games. Just fascinating to look into. If you go back to last year, in fact, I had to write it down. So if you go back to last year, LSU was top 30 in explosive plays. Normally, when you have that on your resume, then that means you were really good at pushing the ball downfield. They weren't. Garrett Nussmeier averaged 7.7 yards per completion. So they had a lot of yards after catch. They stretched the field that way, but they didn't push the ball down the field in the air, and they're very hopeful that they can greatly improve on that. Chris Hilton came back towards the latter portion of last year. If you get a healthy year out of him, he's a guy. Aaron Anderson's back, Nick Anderson, the OU transfer. If you have him healthy, and Barry and Brown, they have the guys in that room, I think, to where that can be a bigger factor. You got to have quarterbacks step up and do that. They've got one of the surest commodities there, or one of the most proven commodities there in Garrett Nussmeier. But also, you're trying to gauge at the offensive tackle position whether you'll be protected and whether you've got enough time to do that. That's what spring's for. That's what God invented spring for. We're trying to figure that stuff out. We don't have to have all the questions answered this time of year. We're trying to get the questions. Obviously, many programs have an open spring. So anytime we start to get into spring, it's kind of like fall camp. Anytime we have the first few fall practices, we try and get as much intel as we can give you. But a lot of it, frankly, a lot of the conversations that I would have with a coach right now would be, we've gotten out there in shorts. I mean, we're still in acclimation period. We haven't really seen what we want to see this spring. Translation, you get a lot better feedback in the coming weeks. It's the same way in fall as it is right now. But any intel is good intel. I've got great news. I got great news for you guys, especially up in Harrisburg, PA. We're here. Not us specifically. We're not on tour right now, per se. But we, as in Academy Sports and Outdoors, are here. And it has occurred to me that many in Harrisburg were shocked to realize that an Academy Sports and Outdoors had opened right in their backyard, and I had not informed you. And for that, I can't help but feel partially responsible. So I'll take a little blame here, which I normally hate doing. I love credit. I'm not a big fan of blame. But Academy has opened. Joe, one of many friends of the program in the greater Harrisburg area, said two things. Number one, he's never heard of producer Jesse, even though Jesse hails from that portion of Pennsylvania. He said that off the record. On the record, he said, I swung by a brand new academy that opened up in Harrisburg. He geared up for the season, and he picked up a big Rally blue raspberry pouch of Big League Chew. I feel the need to remind you again, Big League Chew has no affiliation with this show other than they sent me a bunch of free stuff recently. So that's really all it takes to win my affection. Academy, however, is your one-stop shop for fishing gear, for Big League Chew, A ton of baseball equipment. I was down in Harris County, Georgia last weekend. Academy tents, Academy chairs, bats and balls, gloves purchased at Academy. Really a beautiful thing. That's what spring's all about. Happy children secondarily, but primarily Academy Sports and Outdoors being visited before any child is happy. That's ideally the order that we want that to go in. We appreciate Academy. They are the presenting partner of this show, and they can take care of you pretty much no matter what you need. Now, we do have needs sometimes that Academy cannot take care of, only because it's out of their jurisdiction. That's the only reason. And I got one right here. Transfer portal has been a very, very hot topic. Everyone's got an opinion on it. Even people who don't watch college football know what the transfer portal is. And so we have a question about the transfer portal. In fact, several of them. But no matter what angle you come from, you ask some version of, how do we fix the transfer portal? Ah, great question. Now, for some of you, fixing the transfer portal would mean, how do we stop so many players from transferring every year? Someone else would say, how do we make it to where every player feels totally free to transfer? Don't even demonize them when they do it. There's a third sect of the college football public that says, how do we get college football from the players level to look more like the coaches level, where if coaches transfer whenever they want to, why can't players? Which has always been a very, very short-sighted way to view that, in my opinion. But anyway, everyone's got their take on the transfer portal, whether you're pro or you're against or you're somewhere in the middle. I was perusing The Athletic earlier today, and I saw what I thought was a very interesting piece done by Stuart Mandel and Ralph Russo. It's still over there on the front page of the college football corner of The Athletic if you want to go read it, but it was basically gathering a lot of opinions on the transfer portal around the idea that college football programs are trying to structure contracts with players that punish if you leave, if you break the deal. Or in other words, they're trying to structure the deals that the players have the same way as the deals that the coaches have. If a coach is at Oklahoma State and then Florida wants to hire him, they can do that. But obviously, the coach is breaking his contract with Oklahoma State to go to Florida. Therefore, he owes that school a buyout, however much is in the contract. Usually, it's the school you're going to that pays the buyout. But a lot of people have looked around and said, wow, these players, they have like all the benefit with none of the repercussion. We don't like that. That's out of whack. That's imbalanced. So we want some parameters put in here. Since we're footing the bill for all of your health care, and we're feeding you, and we're housing you, and you're getting a free education, and then you're making a lot of money, not only because of how good you are, but also because you get the rub against a very established brand like that Florida Gator logo, for example. I can be the best wide receiver in the world. If I don't get to go play for USC or Oregon or Florida or North Carolina, I am very limited in my value. So they're sitting there and they're saying, if you get all that, which we're happy to give you, we want a little something if you just decide to leave and leave us in a lurch and our roster's out of whack. We're owed something. Or ideally, we put that clause in there so you don't leave. Now, that's what the piece is about. And a lot of people having different opinions on that. Should there be a price to pay if a player wants to transfer, basically? This wouldn't impact you a whole lot, per se, as a fan. But I know a lot of people watching this show, a lot of college football fans have opinions already about the transfer portal. And you don't like that players move freely. You don't like the mercenary feel that it has. It doesn't turn you away from watching the sport. I'm not dumb enough to say that. Well, if you really don't like it, stop watching. It's stupid. It's just stupidity. It's bumper sticker logic. Stop saying it if you want to be taken seriously. So I'm not saying that here. But you can be upset with something and still partake in it. I'm upset with a number of things about college football. I still love college football. So this is one of them for me. Maybe you feel like I do. But I'm looking at that and I'm saying, isn't this backwards? I don't know if it's going to stand up to legal scrutiny, but even if it does, is that really the smartest way to go about trying to achieve maximum roster continuity and minimize roster churn? Because I've always thought, if you want to limit the amount of players who are going into the transfer portal every cycle, don't put a punishment on going in the transfer portal. Incentivize staying where they are. How do you do that? Well, the way you do that is since we're entering the revenue sharing era this year, starting this year, teams are allowed to, allocate up to $20 million amongst their roster, not per player. But guys are going to get paid a whole lot of money this year that they previously would not have gotten to play college football as part of the new revenue sharing era. Well, I've looked at that and I've said, that's great. That's great. I'm all for it. However, in the interest of roster retention, in the interest of roster continuity, and it being a net positive for college football if a true freshman at Texas is also a sophomore at Texas, is also a junior at Texas, is also a senior at Texas, because of the glue that should exist between student athletes and the programs they play for in my ideal college football world. If you want to achieve that, why don't we incentivize guys to pursue that? Just because you're going to get paid a portion via revenue sharing to play at Georgia doesn't mean the freshmen and the seniors get paid the same amount. The way I would look at this is I'd say forget about punishing guys with a buyout if they want to leave Georgia and transfer to Oklahoma. It's probably not going to stand up to legal scrutiny, and even if it does, think about that. Just think about the ramifications on the recruiting trail. If Kirby lost a player and Georgia went after a buyout that was owed to them because that player left Georgia, imagine what Oklahoma could do in the living room recruiting against Georgia. Hey, you want to go there? The minute you don't like it, they're going to try and charge you to leave. It just doesn't work. Practically, it doesn't work, but I'll tell you what does work is Kirby Smart walking in that same living room and saying, if you come to Georgia, I can promise you a couple of things. You're going to get world-class development. We are going to put you in position to play for a national championship or at least compete for one every year. Thirdly, we can tell you you're going to earn a minimum guarantee as a freshman. If you're around as a sophomore, you earn a little bit more, and it rapidly scales. If you're still here as a junior, and then if you're here as a senior, that's when the big money comes. Now, you are free to leave. It is illegal for us to say otherwise. You're free to leave. However, and this is where I think this should be a conference policy, not an individual institution policy, if you leave, you start from square one in terms of the revenue sharing amount you get wherever you go. To me, that's how you achieve that. It makes guys be a lot more particular and a lot more business-minded when they make their decision out of high school because they know my big payday in terms of rev share is not coming for a couple of years. You may get some NIL money, and that's okay, but your big payday is coming if you commit to South Carolina and then you're there 2 years later, and especially if you're there 3 years later. Now, I do think there have to be parameters in there, like if your head coach leaves, you're free to transfer and your status, your earnings status doesn't restart. I understand fairness doctrine and how that has to be woven in there, but broad strokes purposes, you're telling me that you don't think you could achieve more continuity by doing this than you could by trying to force buyouts to be paid if guys transfer? I don't know, guys. I just don't know. Let's move on. I'm a little parched, so if you'll excuse me. I was on the road yesterday, had no Zevia, which is on me because I've got boxes and boxes of it in the office, but I forgot to take it. So how about not one, but 2 sips, 0 sugar sips, might I add, of cream soda Zevia, a Sunday tradition, and Tuesday and Thursday around here. Big, important matters to discuss. Really pressing matter here on the show. KJ hit us up from Asheville, North Carolina. He said, have you seen this Rich Rodriguez thing with him banning players from TikTok? I told you it was a big deal. He said, it seems like an old man who isn't with the times, and it may lose him some guys if you're asking me. KJ, you're probably partially right here. Maybe this will lose Rich Rodriguez as a player. Let me ask you something, KJ. You are the head coach at West Virginia. You walk up to a kid and say, I want you to start at outside linebacker for me. You check all the boxes. You got all the critical factors and traits we want. One ask, don't dance on TikTok. And that kid says, Coach, that's a deal breaker for me. I'm out. Was that kid really going to put his face in the fan for you? Do you really think he was going over the cliff for you? Now, that's a theoretical. I can't prove a counterfactual. I don't know, but I'm just guessing, KJ, that if you were in the head coach's chair at West Virginia or anywhere else, that you may end up adopting a similar policy. So Rich, if you don't know what we're talking about, shame on me for not spelling out the details. Luckily, we do have video. So, Rich Rodriguez walks into West Virginia. Obviously, he's there because the previous guy got fired. Now, while I'm a fan of Neil Brown, generically, anytime a coach gets fired, the new guy's going to come in and he sees some things he doesn't like. Things were allowed to be a certain way, and he wants to put a fresh coat of paint on. It's been done a million times before. Rich Rodriguez is just 1,000,001. However, Rich Rod probably a generation ago when he was in Morgantown never imagined that he would take a hardline stance on something like TikTok, mainly because that was the sound a clock made. It was not an app on a cell phone that really consumed a lot of his players' lives. So the other day he was asked about this. You're going to have a ban on this stuff? You're going to take a social media approach? Coach, what's your opinion on this? We tried to shave this soundbite down, but we couldn't. It's like Colin, a minute and a half long. We tried to shave it down, but he just got on a heater. And when guys get on heaters, you get out of the way, keep your mouth shut, and you let him talk. So here is Rich Rodriguez on sort of a quasi-TikTok ban and the reason why.
They're going to be on it, so I'm not banning them I just banning them from dancing on it. It's like, don't look, we try to have a hard edge, whatever, and you're in there, in your tights, dancing on TikTok. Ain't quite the image of our program that I want. But I told the team today, I said, everything today is about trying to make everybody individual. It's all about the individual. It's all about the individual. And I said, football was one of the last things that was got to be more about the team than the individual. And so I banned dancing on TikTok. I guess I did that. But anything that doesn't look like our program should look, I think it's just like, come on. Really? I'm allowed to do that, I guess. I can have rules. Now, when they, like I said, 20 years from now, they want to be sitting in their pajamas in the basement, eating Cheetos and watching TikTok or whatever the hell, they can go at it. Smoking cannabis, whatever. Knock yourself out. But, the hope or focus can be on winning football games. How about let's win the football game and not worry about winning the TikTok?
You hear that, Jeff and Steve and Michael? I'm just randomly guessing names of people listening to the show. Stop worrying about winning TikTok, the TikTok. Stop worrying about winning it. Listen, whether you agree with his tactics or not, there is a thing in life. There is a line in society. We call it the DGAF line. It is an acronym. You can ask your older brother what it stands for. But wherever the DGAF line is, Rich Rodriguez is well beyond it. So when it comes to gaffing, he D. And therefore he can stand at a podium and say these kinds of things. And a lot of his peers are thinking it, they just don't want to take that stance. However, I'm going to get pushback on this. I know, because I already focus grouped this. Talked to a couple of our younger viewers today in the Pate State community, and sometimes I bounce this off of you guys. I said, hey, what do you think about this? Oh, I hate it. Why do you hate it? Well, he's not letting his players live their lives. Obviously, I could go with the follow-up of, do you really think you're going to walk into the workplace and maintain all of your rights that you would out on the street? Do you really think that there's any world that exists where you go and get paid in exchange for a service, and there aren't certain conditions you have to meet, there aren't certain rights you have to give up in the workplace? I could go that route, but it makes you sound 65 years old. So, not that there's anything wrong with being 65, but we don't believe in age on this show. And so for that reason, among others, I'm not even going to go down that route. I'm going to take that argument, which would be sound, and I'm going to put it on the shelf because I want to go this route instead. Because another one of my focus groupies said, but it's just a reflection of society. Guys want to be active on whatever the most popular platform is, and that happens to be TikTok, and guys just want to be active on there. It's just a reflection of society. I listen to that, and you're not wrong. However, I do have follow-ups, if you'll grant me. And I just want to ask you this. This person happened to be a Tennessee fan, so I'll ask you about Tennessee, but you could just as easily apply this to Morgantown, West Virginia. Do you really want your football players blending in? with society? Do we ever look back on championship teams and the members of those teams and say, boy, when they walked around campus, you couldn't even tell the difference? When I saw Devontae Smith walk in the quad in Tuscaloosa, he acted just like everyone else. You know, Jamar Chase, when he was at LSU, he just blended in. You never would have known he was a superstar receiver. Joe Burrow on that same team, you couldn't even pick him out of a lineup. No, you want him to be the exception to the rule because you want greatness. That's really what you want your team to achieve. Team, notice, there's that key word. There's that key word that Rich Rodriguez was focused on, their team over individual. Now, again, I sound like a youth camp counselor on this, and that's okay because those guys are right a lot of the times, as I figured out early on in life in Pine Mountain, Georgia. You want your guys to be different. I'm just speaking personally here. At Pate State, I don't want my roster acting like everyone else on campus because most other people on campus aren't qualified to do what we're trying to do, and that's win football games. And this is a very violent sport. I know we've tried to touch it up for public consumption, and we try and speak about it with really rounded edges, but it's rough, and you need rough people to be playing it. Physically and mentally, you need to be there. One of the most underreported factors in college football these days is how little trouble players get in. I'm going somewhere with this. A bunch of coaches have talked about this, none of them on the record. We kind of got Elko to talk about it last week, but I swear to you I've had this conversation with no less than 30 coaches, assistants, head coaches. They say, our guys don't get in trouble. It's stunning. It fell off a cliff. Off the field issues used to be a year-round headline grabber. No matter which program it was, outside of the Ivies or the service academies, if you were any good, and sometimes even if you were terrible, you had guys getting in trouble off the field. Think to yourself, outside of a few exceptions to the rule, I don't need you throwing them at me, where's the proliferation of negative headlines? And so you can believe either one, the media's been bought and paid for. I know you all have your takes on that. Or number two, those headlines aren't around as much because the trouble isn't happening as much. Well, I know for a fact it is the latter. Even if some of the former is true, the latter is the case. Hardly anyone's getting in trouble off the field. What changed? Well, what changed is one of the curious little byproducts of this generation where players are getting paid money and they know because of this piece of technology that they have in their back pocket, everyone's watching them, is no one wants to take a chance. No one wants to do anything that would cast them in a bad light. You may look at that and say, well, that sounds like a good thing. It's a very good thing. Of course it's a very good thing. It's almost a great thing, but I'll tell you, sometimes even really, really good things have a side effect, an unintended consequence. And Rich Rodriguez is probably experiencing a little bit of this, but he's not the only one. You got a lot of coaches out there. They will never say this publicly. This does not pass the PR department, but they're looking and they're saying, you know, my guys lack an edge. And I think it's because they're too nice. We've got too many choir boys on this team. And so for so long, we preached personal responsibility and accountability, and finally, the message looks to have been received, maybe not necessarily because you preached it, but for whatever the reasons are, external factors included, these guys are acting exactly how we always wanted them to act. We hardly have any issues. I hardly have to release any statements about player arrests or lack of accountability. However, I'm noticing a little timidity, a little trepidation, not as many vocal leaders here, not as many alphas in the room. And, you know, back in the day when we had guys getting in a little bit more trouble, it seems to have not been as big of an issue. This is a conversation happening in a lot of places. Not all places, but a lot of places. I just wonder from afar if he's looking at that a little bit. If he's looking and saying, I got more guys willing to dance on TikTok than I do willing to put their nose in this briar patch here on third down and short. I'm not a big fan of this. So if we can't get one, I certainly don't want to be dealing with the other. Now the trade-off here, because it's all about trade, the trade-off here is Rich Rodriguez better understand that if these guys acquiesce to this request or demand, then you're going to have to give them something. I've never seen Rich Rodriguez dance. I have no clue how good a dancer he is. But look, if Mac Brown can do it, you can do it. You need to give those guys that at least. When you win games this fall, you need to be prepared to completely and utterly humiliate yourself in that locker room by doing something that you will not let them do on various social media platforms. It's only right. Let us move on. Where did I put my towns? They're watching us. I'll tell you where they're watching us. Some people think I make these up on the spot. No, I look in the live chat. They're watching us in Tucson, Arizona, Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Woodbine, Georgia. Appreciate you guys so much for being tuned in. So you want to know, huh? I was going to put this at the end of the show, but then I said, why not? Put it in the middle. Henry from Tupelo, Mississippi, suspiciously with a W on the end, he said, yesterday was really hyped in storm circles. Do you think it was a bust? Or did you see anything worth talking about? This is a massive debate right now in the weather community. Was yesterday a bust or not? So for those of you unfamiliar, yesterday was supposed to be historic and explosive, and in many ways it was. I don't make light of this. There were dozens of fatalities in the South and the Mid-South even, and portions of the Midwest over the past 2 days because of violent storms and tornadoes and flooding, wildfire. So it was a very robust storm system that moved across the country. And then afterwards, if you get anything less than an all-time historic outbreak of tornadoes, once the Storms Prediction Center has said, hey, it's coming, the big one's coming, then you have people say, oh, this was a bust. Oh, they missed this forecast. It wasn't a big deal. My take on this, since I was out in the field all day yesterday chasing storms, and I'll tell you about that in a second, is you have to have a two-pronged approach on this. One of them is emotion and public, and the other is science and private. Because I want you to think about this. Let's say you're just in Plantersville, Alabama, which I know got hit hard yesterday. If you lost your home, if you lost a loved one, your entire life just got turned upside down. Can you imagine the discourse that you hear centering around how big a bust the forecast was and how not a big deal this was in the grand scheme of things? Well, your house is strewn across a greater part of the zip code, or worse. That was the worst day of your life. So it was catastrophic in your eyes. So publicly, when you talk about this stuff, to answer the question, no, it wasn't a bust. Because if anyone lost property or had a property damaged or lost a loved one, it was terrible. But absolutely, as a scientist, if you work at the National Weather Service and the Storms Prediction Center, I know several of those guys. One of the first things I did when I went to Norman, Oklahoma this past year was, hey, I can't wait for this Oklahoma football game, but I'm also going to be here Friday. Can I come over? And I went over and met with all those guys. They got to get behind closed doors, and they got to take an emotionless look at what our forecast was. Did it verify? If it didn't, what were the factors? You have to quality control yourself. No different than if you work at a news station or you sell insurance. You got to look at your approach, and then you go attack it, and then you get feedback, and then you adjust. It was a big day. I was out all day yesterday. I drove 1,060 miles yesterday from sunup to way past sundown. I got back to Nashville before midnight, though. I started in Columbus, Georgia. 6 a.m. I set out. I went all the way up to Tuscaloosa, met up with some people. We ended up driving all the way down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We went all over South Mississippi. They got torn up. Prayers for a lot of you guys down there. I know you need it. I know it's going to be a long cleanup. We were in Bassfield. 2 very close calls in Bassfield yesterday, Summerall, Mississippi, Heidelberg, Laurel. So we were all around southern Mississippi. We ended up going all the way back up to Meridian, over into Demopolis, Alabama, back up to Tuscaloosa, over to Birmingham, back to Nashville. Did that all yesterday. Over 1,000 miles. Everything was rain-wrapped. It was really hard to see. We kind of sort of low-key got ourselves in a little bit of a trouble for just a second there near Heidelberg yesterday, but got out. But it was a wild time. Those picturesque, long-track wedge tornadoes that I really thought were going to be a staple of yesterday, those weren't provided in abundance, which is a very good thing. It's not a bad thing. So what my expectations were, they probably weren't quite met, which, again, is a very good thing. I can't emphasize that enough. But, yeah, it was active now. It was rough. It was active. But I don't have a ton of video to show you to answer several questions we got. not a ton of like photogenic moments from yesterday. It's just rain-wrapped tornadoes. That's what we were dealing with yesterday. I got into it. I saw several people ask, before I move on here, because it's a college football show, I saw many people ask a question about this. I did want to address it. Friday, some of you saw that I had a little interaction back and forth. It wasn't pleasant. It was with someone who just kind of called out the way I talk about weather. I am very passionate about atmospheric science. I'm a huge weather nerd. I've loved it my whole life. Storm chasing is my other biggest hobby. And this was a person who I have since spoken privately with. We hashed it all out. It's fine. But they had an opinion. They expressed it with me. And this is a person who has suffered loss in the past due to severe weather. So when they look at someone glorify or celebrate chasing storms, chasing tornadoes, they got a problem with it. So I listened to it, took it to heart, offered my perspective. But a lot of you asked about that. Like, what was the deal with that? It was just two people viewing things two different ways. Both had their reasons. Handled it privately. We're good now. But, I wasn't going to air that out on the show. Still not going to air that out on the show. But there's an understanding. It circles back to what we were just talking about there. There's a delicate way you have to deal with this. There's no thrill to me like seeing a tornado. Ideally, you always see them chewing up a wide open cornfield in Nebraska, and outside of maybe loss of crops, fingers crossed, insured, no one gets hurt. That's an ideal world. This is no fairy tale world, so oftentimes you can't have one without having the downside, which is property loss and sometimes worse. I've always looked at it as me rooting for it or not is not going to change whether it happens or not. So as long as it's going to happen, number one, since I'm very passionate about it, it just boggles your mind when you can witness that stuff live. I want to go experience it, and I accept the risk. But also, just so you understand, our primary objective out there is visualizing and then gathering. If you're in the data gathering field, you may run a YouTube channel, whatever your main goal out there is. The secondary goal for everyone is you better be equipped and ready to help the moment search and rescue time sets in. Everyone I know who chases has participated in it. You've got stories that I wouldn't tell on air. I've got my own. I wouldn't tell them on air. You see some terrible things, but you know if that's going to happen. That's the trade-off. You want to be out there, you want to thrill seek, that's fine. But you also got to be ready to put yourself in position to help. So that's kind of part of the package there. Just so everyone understands that. Anyone who gets into that field, that's something you need to accept as being part of your role. I stopped at 5 Quick Trips yesterday. Boy, they fueled us yesterday. And that rental car was an SUV, so it chewed through a lot of Quick Trip supply. I chewed through a lot of cold brew from Quick Trip, and I put the raisins in the trail mix yesterday. Why not 7? I think I downed 7 packs of trail mix. But Quick Trip, they just fueled the whole tour yesterday. And then we'll go on the road this week, and they'll fuel the tour again, and we appreciate them so much for being on hand to basically make it all possible. All right, let's move along. Let's move merrily along. Got several more questions here. It's not a mailbag episode. I just had an overflow the other day, so I wanted to put some of these questions in here. It's stuff I wanted to talk about anyway. Hopeful American, aren't we all, from Bear Lake, Michigan, hit me and said, hey, I'm wondering if you think this year is a year that Penn State must win a national championship. I personally think they need to make it to the playoff and beat a team ranked equivalent to them or better, but my friend disagrees. He says they need to win it all. Well, this just means, is Penn State national championship or bust this year? You know, only on the rarest of occasions do I believe in that. Ohio State this past year was one of those. I thought they were national title or bust. All the events, it was a confluence of events and circumstances, and they had to win it, and they did. I thought it would have been a bust. Anything short of that would have been a bust. However, that is such an exception to the rule. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it's national championship or bust for Penn State. I would ask your friend there, okay, what if they don't win it? Is it a bust? What does bust mean, by the way? It's a failure? So keep in mind, he didn't explain what the A or B is. There's A, win the national championship, or anything else is a bust. Okay, well, there's a scenario where they beat Oregon in the regular season en route to going undefeated. Okay, then let's say they play Ohio State in Indianapolis and they beat them and win the Big Ten, and then they go win a couple of games in the playoff. They get knocked out in the semifinal or the national title game. That's a bust? You realize how much you just did that's right at the pinnacle of achievement for Penn State football in the modern era? That's not a bust. It's a bust if they go 10-2 and then they're one and done in the playoffs because you expect more from this group than what they achieved last year. Yeah, I can grant you that that would be disappointing. Bust? I don't know. I think it's disrespectful for how hard it is. There's an assumption, I think a lot of times if you make it to a certain level, like Penn State last year, they win, well, they make it to the Big Ten title game, then they make the playoff, they win a couple of games, they go to the semifinals. You can fool yourself into thinking, okay, that's where we pick up next year. That's not where you pick up next year. That's the tough part. That's the tough part of not getting the job done. When you get a shot at the title, is you don't just become the number one contender again. You start from scratch. You go all the way back down the ladder. You're laying on the floor with everyone else. And while you may be equipped to climb better than the rest of them, you still got to make the climb the next year. And there's all sorts of variability. You could have injuries. You could have guys defect or transfer. You could have the portal not feed you what you need. Like, are they going to be good enough at receiver to do more than they did last year? Jury's still out on that. But if you believe it, if you believe it's national title or bust, I ask, what is a bust? What defines a bust? And then the follow-up, okay, if something goes bust, then I want changes. That's the way I would look at things. If you're a bust, then I've got to make changes. Well, does that mean if they don't win the national title, you want someone other than James Franklin? Or maybe we view the word bust differently. I don't know. But to me, what I want to see him do is win a game as an underdog. That means beat Ohio State. They got a great shot against Oregon. Colin, I don't know if you threw up their schedule. You probably did, and I wasn't looking. There it is again. If you're listening on pod, they play 3 games they should win, and then they've got Oregon at home. Oregon's replacing a ton of production, and Oregon's got to go all the way over to State College. Granted, it's early in the season, so weather's probably not a factor. Oh, by the way, does anyone want to guess what time kickoff will be there? If it's big noon kickoff, that is a 9 a.m. body clock kickoff for the Ducks. Is this the one time Penn State wants to play a big game at noon? No. Even though it would be an advantage, I know you guys want the whiteout. Look, I'm calling in all my favors to Fox. We may call Klatt on air. Maybe we'll call Joel Klatt on air. Say, hey, can you help us here, buddy? He wouldn't pick up this late. I don't think so. But my point there, because I was making one. I was off to a good start there, and I derailed myself. They play Oregon in week 4. That'll be a really tight point spread game. But winning that game, that'd be good. That's winning against one of the best programs in the country. But then I'll tell you the one I'd really love. See that game at Ohio State, November 1st? Win that game. You win that game, and you bought a lot of equity with me. But if it's just another one of those seasons where they split and maybe they beat Oregon because they should win that game, but then they go lose to Ohio State in typical hard-fought, close but no cigar Penn State fashion, and then they either miss out on the Big Ten title game or they go, but they get beat again, and then they survive in the playoff only up until they face an equal or slightly better than opponent. That's a failure of a season to me, because when you got this much returning production, this much chemistry and synergy as a program, that team has a lot of it, not to mention your quarterback's coming back, you ought to be able to do more. I thought the same thing about Ole Miss last year. That's why Ole Miss was a failure to me last year. They didn't even make the playoff. But I just looked at it and I said, don't you have to achieve more than last year's team did, if a lot of them are coming back, for me to consider the season a success? And I think that is fair. So whether we consider the season a success or not, I can talk like that if you want me to, but I'm not putting it on whether you win a national title or not. That's a lofty standard, very lofty. Not that you shouldn't have lofty standards, but man, that's I don't know, that's tough. But fair, I guess, but tough. I did want to acknowledge something on the show. It's not sad news, I guess. Uncle Dennis Dodd, known around here as Uncle Dennis, has announced his retirement from CBS Sports. It's a legit retirement. He told me about it at the national championship game in the press box. I said, "What are they doing to you?" He said, No. He spelled it out for me. "I'm legit retiring. Don't worry. You don't need to go set a fire to anything." So I'm not. And I always am anti-arson. You guys know that about me. Don't lose to food. Don't set stuff on fire. 2 of the many rules that we have on this show. But Uncle Dennis, street name Dennis Dodd, is retiring, and I just wanted to share some things with you. One of 75 photos that I found in the iJosh of me and Uncle Dennis on the road. I've hung out with this dude a lot. I have spoken glowingly about him. And some of you have taken issue with something he's written about your team over the years, and you're like, "Man, why do you go so hard in the paint for Dennis Dodd?" Because he has stood up for us. And this is a story I would never tell while he was employed here. But I want you to know, when we came here, when we brought this show to this platform, and we got to hold that CBS microphone in our hands there, which gives you that legacy media rub. It is a major media company, for lack of a better term, validating your existence. Some people in our industry had a problem with that, namely the people that had been around for a long time writing for a living. I've got immense respect for those folks, Dennis Dodd included. I've read Dennis Dodd since I was a kid, so it was an honor to get to work with him. But what I experienced, and what you find when you're viewed as a disruptor and you're sort of the new guy but coming in from a different lane, is a lot of people get threatened by it. A lot of people don't like it. They cold shoulder you. They're the last person to try and help open any door, which to me was cool because I didn't want that handout anyway. But it's made very clear. You hear secondary, you hear secondhand what a lot of people say about you. You feel the body language in the press boxes, which, joke was on those folks. I hang out on the field because I don't want to be in the press box around them anyway, most of them. But I felt that from a lot of people. Dennis Dodd was the total opposite. You take all the negativity that we felt and the vibes that we got when we first got this break, this opportunity, and then you invert it and you get Dennis Dodd. Dennis Dodd, first time I ever met him. Let me know if I can do anything to help. Here's this contact. Here's this bit of information. He'd call with bits of nugget and intel all the time to try and help the show. Always gave good feedback. Always very helpful. And I appreciated it because it was a rarity. And it's continued to be a rarity because, hey, the folks that didn't want anything to do with us initially still don't want anything to do with us. Now they just have the added layer of jealousy because we've been able to achieve a lot with the show. We get more access than they do. We got better relationships than they do, which I appreciate because that's due to a lot of people not named me. It's due to the dudes behind this wall. It's due to you. So I am very appreciative of that, and I can speak so directly about it because I'm not actually talking about myself, because I could yell into the air all day, every day. We wouldn't achieve anything. We've achieved with the show because you guys have helped us achieve with the show. They don't like that. Dennis Dodd's not one of them. So that's why I wanted to take time on the show to wish him a very happy retirement. I am completely confident that he could do this another 20 years if he wanted to. Dennis is in numbers, Dennis is up there. In spirit, in health, Dennis is like a solid 46 years old. He takes interviews, does radio interviews, walking on the treadmill. I've experienced this before when we'd be on the road and would work out at the same time. Just a machine, physically. So he is choosing to retire and go travel, and I wish him nothing but the best. But he was a real one from day one, as Meemaw would say. So happy trails to Uncle Dennis. We salute you in retirement, and we are a better university here at Pate State for having known you, and you have a tenured position anytime you want it. Let's move along, try and make him proud with this next portion of the show. Coach K, not of Duke fame, from Bryan, Texas, he hit us, he said, aside from cutting down the size of conferences, what are some ways to make conference schedules as balanced as possible for teams within the same conference? Now, notice the last words there, within the same conference. Here's what we can't do. We cannot make an SEC schedule equal to an ACC schedule. That's foolish. So like he just said, let's not go there. I also noticed the second part. Aside from limiting the size of the conference, well, Coach, okay, respectfully, I don't want to just glance over that because that's the answer. Cut down the size of the conferences. That's how you make the schedules more balanced. However, we're obviously not headed there. So we have to continue to participate in this charade with 16, 18, who knows, 20-team conferences in the future. Simple change is change the date of the schedule release. How about that? I don't need to know my schedule 2 years in advance. I don't need to know my schedule 10 months in advance. You know what I'd love to do? And when I'm college football commissioner, I'll push to do this, is I would push to have our national championship, hopefully earlier than the third week of January, and then get out of the way for a second and let the NFL finish their season, which is in mid-February. And then in late February, what I would do is I would announce the schedule for that season. And head coaches wouldn't love it because head coaches want as many things figured out for them as far in advance as possible. But you'll live. I pay you $5 million more a year. You'll live if you find out that you're going to play Vandy in week 3 in February of that year instead of February 3 years prior. And what I would do there is, obviously, I'd create a huge spectacle for college football in late February, which still has not grasped the collective concept of owning the calendar for a year instead of a few months. But number 2, I would remove the concept of just inverting the schedule year to year. Like in the SEC, everybody you played last year, you play this year. In conference play, it's just the locations flip. It's dumb to me. It's dumb scheduling. Third thing that I accomplish with releasing schedules the February of that season, of that year, is I insert a mechanism for balancing the schedule. And what I mean by that is you don't know everything you need to know about teams in February of that year, but you know a whole heck of a lot more about who may or may not be good than you did 4 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever it is your computer spat the schedule out. Because right now, you can come up with whatever system you want. The league schedules are totally out of whack. You can define strength of schedule however you want. Look at Oklahoma in the SEC. We use our own system. Like I said, you can choose however you want to break this stuff down. Most of the time, we're going to have the same strength of schedule, or roughly thereabouts. The way we do it is in tiers, and Oklahoma plays 9 teams rated Tier 1 or Tier 2 this year. Tennessee plays 4. They're in the same conference. It's stupid. In the Big Ten, Wisconsin plays 8 teams. We rate Tier 3 or higher. Indiana plays 4. They're in the same conference. It's stupid. Now, I know my comment section because I know my audience well enough, and I know there's a solid 10% of people who rage view this show just so they can rip it to pieces. One of you is going to come at me and say, you can't know how good teams are going to be in February, so how could you build a balanced schedule? Well, you couldn't totally build a balanced schedule. I'm not suggesting you could. What I am suggesting is you could build a whole lot more balanced schedule across the league than you have right now. There's not a perfect world. There's not a perfect answer here. There's a worse one and a better one. Are you suggesting that my idea is garbage, or the idea of waiting until that year to present the schedule so that you have a more balanced approach is not as good or fair as the current way it's being done? Because that's really the A, B here. There is a C, though. There is a C. Give me your idea. How would you like to approach scheduling so that it's more fair and it's more balanced within a league? I'm not even talking about the playoff selection process. I'm talking about within the Big Ten, just for the sake of balance in the Big Ten, or in the SEC, just for the sake of balance in the SEC. I'm telling you, I think it's insane to just randomize the schedule. I think you need informed opinion in the scheduling making process, and I think it ought not be done until early in the year that the games will be played. That's what I think. And first off, I'd love to be on the committee. But secondly, I'd love that committee to define the value or the difficulty of opponents, just like we did, and then try and balance that schedule by schedule process out as much as they can. It wouldn't be perfect. There's no system out there. I got no system that could see Indiana 2024 coming. There are going to be surprises every year. You could try as much as you possibly can to balance the schedule. Someone's still going to play the hardest. Someone's still going to play the easiest. That's a certainty in any system. I just think it's a lot smarter to do it this way. Would it upset some people? Of course it would. Coaches wouldn't like it because they want to know who their opponents that year are going to be way before spring, because they can structure their spring practice to start working on opponents for the fall. You can still do that. You're just going to have a lot less lead time on it. You can still do that. But the net gain here is I don't have disparity in strength of schedule like I do with Oklahoma versus Tennessee right now, or Wisconsin versus Indiana. Part B is it'll be pretty entertaining. Get to February, late February, you find out who you're going to play that fall, where you're going to play them that fall. And, I mean, C is we just get smarter about the whole thing. And then FanDuel could put out odds, and they could put out over-unders and team win totals, which they've already done. They're the exclusive odds provider of the show. It's over there right now. Now, I also did see, with the bracket reveals today, I also saw, what was it? I think one of those 12-5s. What was it? Colorado State and, who was it, Jesse? Who was that 12-5? Colorado State and Memphis, I think it was. The 12's favored by 2.5 points over the 5. That's interesting. The same person who theoretically replied there, that's the one who's going to say, oh, I guess we shouldn't even play the game then. I just get, people are so difficult. So intentional ignorance is the worst ignorance. Like when you merely point out, hey man, this 12 is favored against this 5. That's all you're doing. Believe it or not, that's all you're doing. You're just pointing it out because it's interesting, because it flies in the face of convention, right? Then in the very next breath, if you felt like you needed to say it, you would say, but of course that doesn't matter. They're going to have to play the game. Point spread's not a score. Point spread's just a point spread. Nope. That guy's going to be in the corner over there. The forever antagonist is going to be in the corner over there. Oh, I guess we just shouldn't even play the game. Why do we even play the games anymore? To determine a winner. That's why we play the games, to determine a winner. Well, you're over here talking about point spreads. I am. This is the important part of the argument. Just shut up. Because they count on you to keep talking. But you're right. You don't have to explain yourself. When your enemy is trafficking in ignorance, get out of the way and just let him keep digging the hole. So yes, I was talking about point spreads. And they'll just yee-yaw and ham-haw, and eventually they'll start drilling on themselves, and they'll ring the bell. They'll call the debate. Don't be that guy. Don't be a guy that thinks point spreads equal we shouldn't even have to play the game. Don't be that guy. Speaking of brackets, what a way to end the show here. What a way to end the show. Johnny from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, he said, everyone is saying the playoff seeding needs to be fixed. What's the argument in keeping it the way it is? You know, this is a very, very astutely worded question. What Johnny's saying is, by his estimation, everybody looked at the playoff seeding this past year and said, I think we need to fix this. I am included, Johnny. I looked at it and I said, good for Boise, but there's no way they should have a first-round bye just because they won the Mountain West. I don't think Arizona State should have a bye just because they won the Big 12. It ended up screwing Oregon in the process. So I think a lot of people have looked at it, Johnny, as you said, and they've said, yeah, you can keep the playoff whatever size, but we shouldn't have these ridiculous baked-in parameters for who can and can't have a first-round bye. And that's the overwhelming sentiment right now. As far as I could tell, an overwhelming supermajority of college football fans would prefer just straight seeding. And if you want to bake in guarantees for the conference champs, whatever. Personally, I never even favored that. But I get it. I will cave on that. You can have guarantees for your conference champs, but certainly no guarantee that those are going to be the only ones with first-round byes. What Johnny is asking is, well, why is this even debatable? Who's on the other side of this? What's their point? I'm glad you asked, Johnny. I took it to the streets, Michael McDonald style, and I found out that there are a few points. By the way, all that means is I know 70s music very well. It's an insult to call it yacht rock. Watch the documentary, people. It's not yacht rock to the people who recorded it. But anyway, I know 70s music, that's where the reference came from, but also I know some people who feel this way. I know some people who actually did like the way it was this past year. And while I staunchly disagree with them, I was willing to hear them out. And they said that they like that system because it really, really crystallizes the value and places importance on winning a conference title. My response to that is, number one, it's very arbitrary, but you don't care about that. Number two, this is 2025. To pretend like all conference champs are created equal or are even in the same ballpark in terms of value of accomplishment is ludicrous. You got two major conferences and then everyone else in college football right now. So then their response is, well, we don't care. The SEC and the Big Ten get their way on everything else. There should still be a seat at the table for the little guy. There should still be some guarantee for the little guy. And boom, once they say that, conversation's over. Because at that point, they've displayed, they just think a different way. That's okay. There's room for all at the table of college football. But when I hear someone say that, it means they're not about logic-based structure. They enjoy the chaos. They enjoy the imbalance. They love disrupting. And if you're that kind of person, you're that kind of person. But that means you looked at Boise as well last year and you said, yeah, winning the Mountain West probably isn't the same level of accomplishment as being the runner-up in the Big Ten or the SEC, but I don't care. Everything after the but is irrelevant, immunity. Everything following that is just going to get a smile and a head nod from me, but that's not a serious debate. For guys like me and you, Johnny, we look at it and we say, that's crazy. But you asked me how anyone could disagree with this. That's how they disagree with it. But to remind you what we're talking about here, we have the way it played out in 2024. If we were to go with the way that many of us want to go, and that is to just straight seed it, 1 through 12 with your conference champs baked in, that's the order. And if you're number 2 or number 4 or number 3 or number 1, you're going to get a first round bye. It doesn't matter if every one of you are from the ACC or one of you is from the SEC and Big 10 and Big 12 and 8, whoever it is, you're going to get the first round byes. If we were to have seeded the tournament that way this past year, think about how different life is for Oregon. As it was, Oregon gets the first round bye, and then they end up playing Ohio State, the hottest team, best team in the tournament. Well, Oregon's path would have had them still with a first round bye, but they would have played the winner of Indiana-Boise. They would have been an overwhelming favorite against either. My guess is they would have beaten either. They then would have moved on to play either Penn State, Notre Dame, or Clemson. They would have out-rostered all three of them as well. No guarantee that they would have won, but they had just played Penn State and beat them. My guess is they'd be a solid favorite against either Clemson or Notre Dame. And notice, you could tell me, hey, whether they lost to Ohio State in round 2 or lost to them in the championship game, they still would have lost to them. Maybe they would have, but there's a lot more that could go wrong for Ohio State when they have to play 1, 2, 3 games before they get to face you. And one of them would have been against Texas, and the other one would have probably been against either Tennessee or Georgia. You got a lot more opportunity to get injured or just get beat. And then if they beat you in the championship game, they beat you in the championship game. But Oregon essentially got punished last year for being good, and that shouldn't be that way. So the big question, of course, as we talk about this is, will anything change? Here we are. It is March 16th. We still don't know if there will be rule changes for this upcoming year. We all know it's going to get torched, and we're going to start from scratch in 2026 and beyond. But there is still an effort being made to change the parameters, to change the rules for the playoff this upcoming year. Will it happen? I guess that's where we have to leave it tonight. Appreciate you guys so much. We'll be back Tuesday. That's when we're going to have our second show for the week. We're going to have it Tuesday. And that's about all I have. For Direct Colin, producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to your week, and God bless.